you think of where this is at right now tonight with all these demands from the witness, the accuser, and the insistence of the committee that they're going to go ahead on Monday, take her or not?
I think Dr. Ford is running out of options. I think she needs to show up on Monday and offer her testimony if she wants to be heard, because for better or for worse, she is not in charge of this. The Senate is in charge of this. That committee's in charge of this. And their obligation is to provide advice and consent to the president on his judicial nominee. And so they get to decide what will inform that decision. And what they've decided is they'll reopen the hearings, which they think is an accommodation, given that Dianne Feinstein knew about this allegation when the hearings were open originally and didn't raise it. She could have raised it, saying there's an anonymous accuser. But notwithstanding that, they're reopening it and giving her the chance to speak publicly, privately. Senator Grassley even said, we'll send somebody out to California to interview you. And she's rejected all of those. And Senator Cornyn is right that she isn't in a position to demand protocols. It's not her right.
What would it be like Monday afternoon if there's no hearing and they proceed to a vote next week? Will this possibility, this witness, she could go on 60 Minutes, she could go on your program, she's still going to be out there with her charges. What will that do to the lifetime appointment and confirmation, if he is confirmed, of Kavanaugh, with this hanging out there as part of the history book?
It's tough to say, because one of the reasons why she should come forward story, and I realize she's going through a lot right now with the death threats and all the insane stuff that's happening to her, but I can say this: it's not easy for any sexual assault victim or a person who claims to be a victim. We don't know in her case one way or the other, but hearing her would really help. And it's always tough for these women to actually come forward and offer their testimonial. It's never an easy thing, but women stand up every day in criminal courts and civil courts across this country, and they do it. And I would say most find it rather empowering to tell the story. So, if she wants to be heard, she has an opportunity. Monday is still a few days away, and she could do it. If she doesn't do it, then she might ding the guy up publicly as a matter of reputation, as she already has. But it's not going to be much more than that. And so this is it. It's do or die for her.
Okay, if you're Chuck Grassley and you're the majority members of that committee, and you're right, they've got the call on how to do this. You're looking at a guy who's publicly identified himself as a drinking buddy of Kavanaugh. He wrote a book where he described a character as Bart O'Kavanaugh, who was a big drinker with him. Okay, people make up stories. This seems a little closer to life. What about inviting him? And what about inviting the other woman who put out the word today, just today? By the way, they're showing up now, these sort of third-degree witnesses, that she knew about the buzz at the time of this story, and that he was accused, according to the accuser, Dr. Ford, of being the guy who pounced on the two of them when they were on that bed together. Shouldn't he be called as a witness as well, if you're Chuck Grassley, the chairman?
So not unless you get the accuser on the record. I mean, that's how any investigation would begin. An FBI investigation, a police investigation, or a congressional investigation starts always with the accuser. So if the accuser is not going to go offer her testimonial, then that is pointless. As for her friend, or the woman claiming to be her friend, she deleted that tweet right after she sent it. And she admitted very quickly thereafter, all right, I have no firsthand knowledge. So I don't know how much probative value there is there. What we've seen in other Me Too allegations, Chris, and the thing that really winds up condemning anyone who finds themselves on the wrong end of these, are a series of accusations.
Right.
That's not to say you can't have one that is damning enough to ruin a person's career, who's on the receiving end of it. But it tends to be one woman or person opens the floodgates, and then others come forward saying, me too, me too, me too. For whatever it's worth, in Kavanaugh's case, we haven't seen that in the days since this is broken. It's been about a week. And moreover, what we have right now is repeated testimonials of 30-plus years of exemplary public service. Now, the Democrats may not like Kavanaugh, I realize that, but they should consider what they're going to get if he goes away and Trump rushes to replace him.
Do you think it'll be good for the Republican Party to have two Supreme Court justices, both associate justices, who have had this problem, generally speaking?
I don't think Republicans are going to care about that at all. They want a conservative justice, right? They don't believe in Anita Hill, and they're probably not going to believe Dr. Ford. This is so political, right? I mean, the whole thing, I believe this woman should be heard. I hope she shows up and testifies on Monday. But the truth is, most of these Republicans are not inclined to believe her, no matter what she says. And most of the Democrats are not inclined to believe Judge Kavanaugh, no matter what he says. So part of this is all politics, and it's for show. And I frankly don't blame either party for not wanting anything to do with it. But my calculation right now is probably nothing's going to change, and he's going to get confirmed.
Well, your brutal assessment of the Republican thinking on this and wanting to move forward with this seems to be squaring with all kinds of evidence. Thank you so much. It's great to have you, Megyn. Good luck with everything, and thank you for coming on tonight. I know you're an expert on this.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.